By the time Dr. Hannah Reed stood at the podium, the auditorium felt like a courtroom. TV cameras, flashing red lights. The hospital board lined up in dark suits behind her like a wall. On the screen beside her, a paused news clip showed exactly what they were furious about. Hannah, president and CEO of Lakefront General Hospital, standing in the middle of a freezing parking lot, coat thrown over a stranger's shoulders, kids huddled around her, and a bright yellow school bus in the background with the words "Neighborhood Riders" spray-painted on the side. "Read the statement," the board chairman whispered at her elbow, "or you're done here." The printed speech in front of her called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. It blamed the man with the bus. It denied that any hospital policy had been broken, denied any personal relationship, denied that the community program she'd started with him had anything to do with hospital funds. Hannah's hands trembled, but not from fear of losing her job. She was afraid of something worse going back to the way things were before that bus limped into her parking lot, and a tired single dad with grease on his hands looked her in the eye and said, "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep these kids safe. Your people told us to move along." Every camera focused on her. The red light above the main one blinked. She took a breath, pushed the scripted statement aside and said, "I'm not going to lie to you tonight. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." Hannah Reed was 41 years old, and by most accounts, she had won. She ran the largest hospital system in northern Ohio. Her name was on magazine covers, her face on billboards about modern healthcare leadership. She lived in a high-rise condo on the lake where the waves slammed against the break wall like they were trying to climb up and drag her back to the South Side duplex she grew up in. Her days were a blur of budget meetings, capacity forecasts, and arguments about which department could survive another round of cuts. She knew the cost of an MRI scan down to the penny. She knew how many minutes an ambulance could be delayed before the metrics turned red. What she did not know, had not allowed herself to know for years, was the sound of her own laughter when it wasn't forced at a fundraiser table. Her father had died in an ER waiting room when she was 17, sitting in a plastic chair under a broken clock, while an overworked nurse told him to wait his turn. He never made it to the back. Hannah swore that night she would fix the system that failed him. Somewhere along the line, fixing the system turned into defending the system, polishing its image, squeezing its numbers until they shined. She had no husband, no kids. Her mother lived 2 states away and only called when she needed help with a bill. The staff respected Hannah's efficiency, feared her temper, and whispered nicknames when they thought she was out of earshot. Ice Doc, Queen of the Charts. To the board, she was a perfectly controlled asset. As long as the profits climbed, her personal life might as well not exist. That December, the lake wind came in sideways and mean. Flu cases were up. Nurses were quitting. The board wanted another round of cost optimization before the new year. Hannah stayed late nearly every night, walking the quiet hallways, after visiting hours listening to the hum of machines and the squeak of cleaning carts. It was easier than going home to the silence of her spotless condo. The night everything changed, it was just after 1 a.m. Security buzzed her office voice tight. "Dr. Reed, we've got a situation out front you'll want to see." She almost told them to handle it themselves. Then she heard the rest. "There's an old school bus broken down in the ambulance lane. A guy says he's responsible for the kids inside. My supervisor told me to have them towed off the property. The kids are crying, ma'am." Hannah glanced at the spreadsheet glowing on her screen, the one that told her how much each minute of ambulance delay could cost the hospital. Then she looked at the snow blowing sideways past her window. She grabbed her coat and headed for the elevator, not knowing that the man waiting at the bottom of that ramp with grease on his hands and 6 shivering neighborhood kids behind him was about to tear open every wall she'd spent 24 years building. Snow blasted sideways across the ambulance bay as Hannah stepped out into the cold. The broken-down school bus looked like it had been dragged out of another lifetime. Faded yellow paint rust streaking along the wheel wells, and a plume of white smoke breathing weakly from under the hood. 6 kids huddled inside, bundled in mismatched coats, their faces pressed against fogged windows. And there, standing between the bus and the hospital entrance, was the man she'd only seen in that news clip frozen beside her at the board meeting. A tired single dad, 20 years her junior, but with a gravity about him that made him seem older. Tonight, though, the gravity wasn't what hit her first. It was his fear, not for himself, for those kids. "Ma'am," he said as she approached, "I swear, I'm not trying to cause trouble. We were taking kids home from the after-school program. The engine died. The police said to move along. Security here said we'd be towed. But the littlest one..." He looked back at a tiny girl curled under a blanket. "She's got asthma. I didn't know where else to go." Hannah didn't know why her throat tightened at that. Maybe because she'd been that kid once, sick, cold, and told to wait her turn. Maybe because this man who looked like he'd worked 3 jobs back to back somehow still radiated gentleness. Maybe because she'd spent half her life believing compassion was a PR risk instead of a requirement for breathing. Before she could answer, the security supervisor stormed over, jaw clenched. "Dr. Reed, we need that bus moved now. This is an emergency lane and we have 3 ambulances en route. I told this man I heard what you told him," Hannah said. "And I'll handle it." The supervisor hesitated, surprised she'd cut him off. But the disrespect brewing behind him, the tight-lipped smirks from staff watching through the windows, the whispers of "why is she getting involved" was unmistakable. And familiar. Her authority was ironclad in boardrooms, but on the ground floor, people had long grown comfortable deciding what she cared about. Or didn't. She opened the bus door. Warm air heavy with the smell of old vinyl seats, and fear brushed her face. Some kids were crying. One boy clutched a backpack like a shield. "What's your name?" she asked the smallest girl gently. "Kayla," she whispered. Hannah forced a smile she hadn't used in years. "Let's get you warm, sweetheart." Inside, alarms were already going off, not medical ones, but administrative ones. Nurses exchanging looks, an orderly whispering into a walkie-talkie about the CEO dragging in strays, a receptionist muttering about policy. It didn't take long for the first call to hit her phone. CFO Brent McAllister. She ignored it, just long enough to get the kids settled in an unused consultation room, blankets around their shoulders, a nurse checking Kayla's breathing. But as soon as she stepped out into the hallway, Brent was there in person, his expression sour with impatience. "I need a moment," he said, tugging her aside like she was a misbehaving intern instead of his boss. "What exactly are you doing?" "Helping children who needed help. That's not what it looks like." There it was. The phrase she'd heard 300 ways over the years, always meaning the same thing: not what it looks like for investors, not what it looks like for optics, not what it looks like for people who don't want you having a heart. "The cameras outside already caught all this," Brent continued. "An old bus, random kids, you personally escorting them in. Do you want headlines about our CEO running an illegal daycare?" She stared at him. "That's what you're worried about?" "No," he said sharply. "I'm worried about what the board will say in the morning. You're too valuable to be reckless." Reckless. Cold. Ice dock. Numbers first, feelings never. She had built that persona brick by brick, and now it was a cage. "What would you have done?" she asked quietly. "I'd have called the city. Let social services handle it. We're a hospital, not a rescue squad. And what about the girl with asthma? She'd have survived." The callousness stung harder than she expected, because he was the one she'd promoted, the one who reminded her most of herself. And now she saw her own reflection in him and she hated it. He leaned in closer. "Don't make me the bad guy here. You brought this on yourself." The words hit like a slap. Before she could answer, a nurse ran up, breathless. "Dr. Reed, we need you." She rushed back to the consultation room. Kayla's breathing had worsened. The inhaler the kids carried was empty. The little girl clutched Hannah's hand with a fear so raw it cracked something open inside her. The single dad, his name was Marcus, she'd later learn, hovered behind them, face pale. "I didn't know it was that bad," he whispered. "You did everything right," Hannah said. "You got her here." The nebulizer hissed softly, fog curling around the mask held to the child's face. When Kayla's chest finally eased, Marcus covered his face with his hands and let out a shuddering breath. A nurse touched Hannah's arm. "You should know, some of the staff aren't happy." "About what, bringing them in?" "There's talk." "What kind of talk?" The nurse hesitated, then said that you care more about strangers than your own people. A strange ache rippled through Hannah. Because she did care. She cared too much. It had cost her before. But this time the cost would ripple far beyond one exhausted night. When Kayla was stable, Hannah stepped out to find a cluster of staff whispering near the nurse's station. One doctor shook his head dramatically. "She's inserting herself where she doesn't belong." An administrator added, "This is exactly why the board questions her decision-making." They didn't lower their voices when she approached. They didn't stop talking. They didn't hide their disdain. Because she wasn't Hannah Reed to them. She was the CEO. A symbol. A machine. Someone who could sign off on layoffs with a stroke of a pen. One nurse muttered just loud enough. "It must be nice to play hero when you don't have to clean up the mess afterward." She kept her face calm, her posture precise. Old training, her mother's voice in her ear. Never let them see you crack. Never give them a weapon. But inside she felt the fissure widening. Not because they judged her, she was used to that, but because their words echoed a deeper fear. Maybe compassion really did make her weak. Maybe she was risking everything she'd built. Maybe Brent was right. Across the hall, Marcus watched all of this unfold. He didn't argue, didn't defend her, just held Kayla's hand and waited. His silence said enough. He was used to being looked down on, used to being dismissed. And now, because of her, those kids were seeing that same disrespect aimed at the woman trying to help them. The oldest boy, maybe 12, glared at the staff with protective anger. "Why are they talking about her like that?" he asked Marcus. "She's helping us." Marcus swallowed hard, looking away. He didn't answer. He didn't have one. That moment cut deeper than any boardroom threat. A child seeing grown adults punish someone for doing the right thing. A child learning the wrong lesson. The same lesson she'd learned at 17. That the system punishes kindness more than cruelty. Hours passed. Snow piled higher. The crisis moved inside, becoming less about the kids and more about image control and whispered rumors. By morning, the local news vans were parked outside. Someone had leaked photos of the kids being escorted in. The headline rolled across every monitor in the hospital lobby. Lakefront CEO rescues stranded children during storm or overreaches her power. Brent's face appeared on every floor like a specter. "We need a statement," he said. "A formal one. Something that distances you from the children, from Marcus, from compassion." She stared at him until he shifted uncomfortably. When she turned around, she saw the kids lined up quietly in the hallway, backpacks on ready to leave once the city sent a replacement bus. Kayla stepped forward. "Thank you," she whispered. Hannah's eyes stung. She knelt down. "You're very brave." Kayla managed a small smile through the lingering oxygen fog. Behind them, cameras snapped, reporters clicked pens. Brent hissed, "This is a disaster." Hannah rose to her feet slowly. For the first time, she didn't hide her anger. "What exactly is the disaster, Brent? That people saw us help a sick child." His jaw tightened. "That's not how it plays in the market." She stared him down. Maybe the market is wrong. The room fell silent. Staff froze. Even Marcus looked stunned. It was the closest she'd come to breaking ranks with the board in her entire career. And as soon as the words left her mouth, she knew something irreversible had shifted. Because Brent straightened, smoothed his tie, and delivered the sentence that would carry them into the next chapter of conflict. "Dr. Reed," he said coldly, "you've put this entire institution at risk. If you don't fix this today, the board will." Her heart thudded slow and heavy. The kids watched her. Marcus watched her. Half the staff watched her. A line had been drawn. A choice would have to be made. And whichever side she took, someone would bleed for it. The replacement bus never arrived. By early afternoon, the storm that had hammered the city overnight had shifted into something far more dangerous. Ice glazed every road. Tow trucks were spinning out. Ambulances were rerouting around fallen utility poles. The hospital parking lot looked like a disaster zone, flashing lights, frantic chatter over radios, and a gridlock of emergency vehicles fighting for space. And then the call came in from dispatch. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate. Over a dozen injured. Ambulances delayed by the ice. The ER was about to get slammed. Hannah was standing inside the ambulance bay when the first sirens broke through the wind, echoing off the hospital walls like angry warnings. Nurses hustled stretchers into place. Doctors scrubbed in. The triage team formed a line. But the street outside, slick with ice littered with debris from the storm, was barely navigable. Several EMTs had radioed in that they couldn't make it up the incline toward the bay. Vehicles were stalling. One even slid sideways into a snowbank. "We're losing time," a charge nurse said, breathless. "They're stuck out there." "Where exactly?" Hannah asked. "Intersection of Lake Road and Bayview. It's basically a skating rink." Hannah knew that stretch. A steep climb toward the hospital entrance. If ambulances couldn't reach them, injured patients would be trapped in blocked ER trucks with no oxygen support. "We need salt crews," a doctor said. "They're 2 hours out," someone answered. "We need more hands. We don't have them." A nurse turned to Hannah. "What do we do?" Everyone stared at her. And for the first time in days, no one looked annoyed or judgmental. They looked scared. Before she could answer, the hospital administrator, Leonard Briggs, strode in, tie askew, tablet in hand. "Dr. Reed," he barked, "we need to avoid further involvement outside our walls. Liability is already a problem. We'll treat the patients once they're inside. But we can't send staff into that." Hannah stared at him. Into what, she asked? Into the street. Into danger. Into a situation outside hospital jurisdiction. She felt something old and sharp rise in her chest. A memory she hated, a 17-year-old version of herself watching her father gasp in an ER hallway while hospital staff argued about whose responsibility he was. That same tone. That same detachment. That same cowardice hidden behind policy. Her jaw tightened. Across the bay, she saw Marcus sitting with the kids near a waiting room heater. He was trying to keep them calm, reading something off his phone. But he kept glancing toward the chaos outside. The oldest boy watched the ambulances struggling and whispered something with fear in his voice. Hannah felt her chest constrict. She knew what she had to do long before she said it aloud. "Get me traction cleats," she told the nearest staff member. The room went dead silent. Leonard blinked. "Absolutely not. You're the CEO, not an EMT. The EMTs can't reach the entrance, and you think you can." "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Brent, who had slithered in a moment earlier, stepped forward, incredulous. "Hannah, if you go out there and one camera catches it—" "It's not about cameras," she snapped. He opened his mouth to argue, but she had already grabbed her coat. Staff whispered. Nurses exchanged looks. A doctor muttered, "Is she out of her mind?" Someone else whispered, "She could slip and break her neck." But a trauma nurse, Maria, who had been there since Hannah was a resident, looked her square in the eye. "You'll need help pushing stretchers on that ice," she said. "I'm coming." "Maria." "No," a supervisor protested, but she ignored him and grabbed her gloves. A moment later, the side doors burst open, and the sub-zero wind punched into them like a fist. Hannah stepped out first. The cold slapped her face. The ice underfoot felt alive, shifting slick, unpredictable. The incline toward the street shimmered like a frozen waterfall. Down below, 3 ambulances were stuck at odd angles, one with its back doors wide open, the EMT inside performing chest compressions. Another leaned sideways, wheels spinning uselessly. A third had lights flashing weakly, battery fading. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back at the hall full of people staring at her. She moved. Each step was careful, deliberate. Her boots bit into the ice with the cleats. Maria followed behind her, carrying blankets and portable oxygen tanks. Wind sliced at their faces. The world smelled like diesel exhaust and fear. A paramedic inside the nearest ambulance looked up, stunned. "Dr. Reed, what are you doing here, helping you get these people up that hill?" "It's too dangerous." "Then let's be careful." They rigged makeshift traction by laying down shredded blankets. It didn't work well, but it worked enough. Together they eased the stretcher out. It slid. Hannah shifted her weight and corrected. Maria braced the other side. The patient, a middle-aged man with head trauma, groaned. Hannah steadied the stretcher. "You're going to be okay," she told him. The paramedic, panting, said, "We wouldn't have gotten him out of here alone. Good thing you're not alone." It took 10 grueling minutes to guide the stretcher up the incline. Her muscles screamed. Wind stung her eyes until tears froze at the corners. Twice, she almost lost her grip. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not after what happened to her father. Not after all the years she spent building a life that felt like revenge instead of healing. Not after she watched those kids last night and realized compassion wasn't weakness. It was oxygen. By the time they reached the ambulance bay, staff had gathered to help. Hands emerged from every direction. Gloves gripped rails. Voices called out instructions. They moved like a unit. For the second ambulance, 2 orderlies rushed out to join them. For the third, even more staff followed. Someone brought extra traction mats. Someone else shoveled ice. In the distance, cameras flashed. News crews filmed. Bystanders gasped. But Hannah didn't look at any of them. All she saw was the patient in front of her. All she heard was the rasping breath of someone whose time was running out. All she felt was the old wound tearing open so a new one could finally begin to heal. On the third run, halfway up the incline, the stretcher skidded dangerously sideways. Maria shouted. The paramedic slipped. The patient nearly rolled. Hannah lunged, hands locking around the metal frame, her boots sliding, her whole weight pulling against gravity. For a second, her balance broke. Her feet lost grip. She felt herself tipping. A hand grabbed her arm. "Marcus!" He had sprinted out of the bay without a coat, without gloves, just pure instinct and adrenaline. "I've got it!" he shouted. Together with the help of 2 nurses, they steadied the stretcher and pushed the final few feet to safety. As soon as they crossed the threshold into the bay, the crowd erupted into cheers and relieved laughter. Staff clapped. EMTs patted her back. The charge nurse hugged Maria. Hannah exhaled, shaking, exhausted, but not cold anymore. The moment she caught her breath, she realized the entire scene had been filmed. Not by paparazzi, not by PR teams, by her own employees, by patients' families, by citizens who had watched a CEO leave her glass office and climb into the storm to save strangers. One young resident whispered almost reverently, "She didn't have to do that." Another answered, "Yeah, but she did." And standing there in the middle of the bay, hair-soaked, gloves torn, lungs burning, Hannah saw something she had never seen before on their faces. Respect. Real respect. Not the kind forced by authority titles or fear. The kind earned by action. She looked over at Marcus. He looked back at her. And in his eyes, she saw something that caught her off guard: recognition. Maybe even hope. The power in the room shifted in a way no board vote ever could. Before she could fully process it, Brent pushed through the crowd, ashen, jittery, clutching his tablet like a shield. "Hannah," he said hoarsely, glancing at the cameras, capturing everything we need to discuss. The optics of, but before he could finish, a news reporter stepped between them. Live mic, raised voice, trembling with excitement. "Dr. Reed, the entire city just watched you lead the rescue of 3 ambulances. Can you tell us why you went out there yourself?" Hannah inhaled slowly. Her heartbeat settled. Her voice came out steady. "Because people needed help," she said. "And because that's what we're here to do." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Brent fell silent. It was the first time in years she'd said something without rehearsing it, sanitizing it, or calculating its impact. And it landed like truth always does, quietly, powerfully, unmistakably. Behind her, staff straightened their shoulders. Nurses exchanged proud nods. A paramedic murmured, "Damn right." In that moment, the crisis wasn't over. Sirens were still coming. Injuries were still critical. The storm was still raging, but something fundamental had changed. People had seen who she really was. Not the ice dock, not the CEO, not the brand. A leader, a fighter, a woman who walked into the storm when it mattered. And nothing, no boardroom, no headline, no CFO's warning would ever put her back into the box she'd lived in for 24 years. When the next ambulance screeched around the corner, swerving on the ice, everyone turned to her. Not Brent, not Leonard, not the board, her. And she stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. The ambulance bay was a different world now. Loud, breathless, electric. But threaded through it all was a stunned kind of silence whenever people looked at Hannah. Nurses who barely made eye contact with her last week now stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. EMTs she'd never met before gave her nods of respect. A paramedic even clapped her shoulder as he passed, murmuring, "Hell of a thing you did out there." Someone handed her a towel. Someone else pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands. She barely tasted it. Her adrenaline was crashing, leaving her shaking from cold, and something deeper, an emotional tremor she didn't have words for. But she didn't sit. She didn't retreat to her office. She helped guide patients into triage, listened to hurried updates from the trauma team, and rearranged bed assignments to keep the flow moving. Every movement was purposeful, direct calm. She didn't bark orders. She didn't raise her voice. She was simply present, and everyone could feel it. For the first time in this hospital's long memory, The CEO wasn't a ghost floating above the chaos. She was in it, knee-deep, scraped up, and breathing just as hard as the rest of them. By the time the last ambulance was brought in safely, the storm had eased. Snow still fell, but lighter, now gentler. The sky over Lake Erie was turning the faint blue of a late afternoon thaw. Marcus stepped toward her. He had a blanket draped over his shoulders and a raw, grateful expression. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. She wasn't. Not fully, but she nodded. "You shouldn't have been the first one down there," he added, voice quiet. "But I'm damn glad you were." Behind him, Kayla watched Hannah with wide eyes from a wheelchair, her breathing steady again. The kids looked worn out, but safe. Staff brought them hot chocolate and crackers. The oldest boy whispered to the youngest girl, pointing toward Hannah, as if telling her she'd just watched something heroic. Hannah's chest tightened. She didn't feel heroic. She felt like someone who'd finally stopped running from herself. For a moment, everything felt still. Then the board arrived. 6 members marched in through the administrative hallway, coats dusted with snow expressions carved from ice. At their front was Brent, clutching his tablet like it was a shield. "Hannah," he said loudly, "we need a private conversation." Several nurses glared at him. An orderly muttered something under his breath. A paramedic shot Brent a look that could have peeled paint. But Hannah didn't move. "If it's about my going into the storm," she said evenly, "you can say it here." People froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Brent sputtered. "That is completely inappropriate. You told me to fix this?" She gestured toward the ambulances being wheeled inside. "I took that literally." One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Granger, stepped forward. "Hannah, why were you able to do what our own emergency team couldn't? How did you know what to do down there?" Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was bewildered, respectful. Hannah looked around at the staff, at the kids, at Marcus, and realized there was no more hiding. Not from them. Not from herself. She took a slow breath. "I used to be a trauma nurse," she said quietly. A wave of shock rippled across the bay. Several nurses gasped. A doctor actually dropped a clipboard. The residents all turned in unison. Even Maria froze. "I didn't know that," she whispered. Hannah nodded. "Most people don't." She turned to the board, her voice steady. "Before I became an administrator, before I went back to school, before any of this job, this building, these meetings, I worked night shifts in a level 1 trauma unit in Dayton. I was 19. I got licensed early. I spent years in emergency rooms. Storm nights like this one weren't rare. And I promised myself that if I ever saw people stuck without help again, I wouldn't stand by." The room went silent. Marcus stared at her like he'd never truly seen her before. A young resident stepped forward. "Dr. Reed, you were one of us. For a long time," she said. "And I never forgot what it felt like to have leadership demand the impossible from people who were already giving everything." She swallowed. "And I never forgot what it felt like to lose someone because help came too late." Her father. Alone in that hallway. That broken clock above him. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. Something softened across the crowd. Nurses who had cursed her paperwork demands last week now looked at her with something close to awe. Brent, however, turned pale. You deliberately kept this from the board," he stammered. "No," she said. "I never hid it. No one ever asked." Patricia's eyes narrowed at Brent. "Did you know?" "Of course not. But that's irrelevant too." "It's not irrelevant," she snapped. The woman just saved 3 ambulance crews. Marcus crossed his arms. And 6 kids last night. Brent spun on him. You don't work here. I didn't say I did, Marcus replied calmly. But I saw what she did. Twice now. A paramedic chimed in. She's the only reason we didn't lose a patient on that ice. A nurse added, if she weren't here, we'd still have crews stuck on the road. One by one, voices rose, not angry, not chaotic, but resolute. Clear. United. When they finished, the only person not speaking for her was Brent. And the only people Brent was speaking to the board were no longer listening to him. Finally, Patricia looked at Hannah again. You could have stayed inside, she said. Let us deal with the fallout. Let the city handle the emergency response. Let the cameras film a CEO doing nothing wrong. Hannah held her gaze. I've done nothing wrong my whole career, she said. And I've never felt worse about myself than I have this past year. If helping people costs me my job, then that wasn't a job worth keeping. Gasps spread through the room again. Brent jumped forward. This is outrageous, you can't. But Patricia raised a hand. Enough. Brent, step aside. He froze. That's an order, she added. Slowly, Brent backed away, stunned. Then Patricia turned to Hannah. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't scolding either. We've been questioning your judgment, she said, worrying that you were losing your grip. But today you didn't just lead this hospital. You reminded all of us what leadership actually looks like. A second board member, James Holloway, approached. Dr. Reed, he said quietly, we'd like to discuss something with you. Now, she asked. No, he said, after things stabilize. But soon. There's an opportunity we think you're uniquely qualified for, something larger than this building. She blinked. What kind of opportunity? A statewide initiative. A complete overhaul of rural emergency response infrastructure. It's something we've lacked for decades. And after what you just did, we believe you might be the right person to build it. A hush swept over the bay. The staff exchanged glances. Nurses nodded. Maria wiped a tear. Marcus stared at her with something like pride. But Hannah didn't answer yet. Couldn't answer yet. The magnitude of what had just unfolded had barely settled in her bones. Before she could speak, Kayla wheeled closer, her blanket slipping off one shoulder. You helped those people, she said softly. Like you helped us. Her voice trembled. Her small hand reached for Hannah's. You didn't let them be alone. Something broke open inside Hannah quietly, gently, but irrevocably. Because that was exactly what she had been trying not to be her entire life. And now, with every eye on her, and the storm easing into a pale calm, she felt the weight of a new path forming, one she hadn't dared consider until now. A path built on action, not image. On compassion, not control. On connection, not distance. She looked up at the board members, at the staff, at Marcus and the kids, at the ambulance crews who owed their safety to more than luck. And she realized the decision approaching her wasn't just professional. It was personal. Deeply, painfully personal. The world had seen who she was. Now she had to decide who she would become. And that choice, whatever it would be, was waiting just ahead. For the rest of that night, the hospital moved with a different rhythm. People still rushed, still worried, still fought for every life they could. But the tone had changed. Wherever Hannah walked, conversations quieted. Heads lifted, faces softened. Nurses who once avoided eye contact now stopped her just to say thank you. Paramedics she barely knew shook her hand. Even the board members stepped aside when she passed, like they finally understood she wasn't just the woman in the corner office. And Brent, he stayed glued to the wall, red-faced and silent, watching the staff he'd taken for granted line up behind her without being asked. Patricia eventually pulled him aside for a brief, sharp conversation. He didn't come looking for Hannah again. Not that night, and not in the weeks that followed. By morning, the roads had thawed enough for the kids to get home. They packed up their little bags, bundled themselves into borrowed coats, and hugged every nurse who had brought them blankets, snacks, stickers, anything to distract them from the storm outside. When Kayla reached Hannah, she wrapped her tiny arms around her waist with the kind of trust that had nothing to do with titles or job descriptions. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Marcus stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking almost shy. "You didn't have to go out there," he said softly. "But you did, and I'll never forget that." She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. Sometimes the simplest gestures carried the most truth. 2 days later, the board requested a closed-door meeting, not to reprimand her, but to revisit the proposal they'd hinted at in the ambulance bay. They laid out charts, maps, funding options. They spoke about rural counties with failing hospitals, volunteer firefighters without proper training, small towns where a single snowstorm could cut off an entire population. And then Patricia looked at her. "We want you to lead this, Hannah. Not as a CEO answering to a quarterly report, but as the architect of something bigger, something permanent." Hannah stared at the proposal. It didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like a calling. She accepted, not because it was prestigious or strategic or impressive, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to build something with her whole heart, not just her head. There were whispers, of course. Surprise from outside executives, a few angry murmurs from board members who preferred the old guard. And Brent, no longer CFO, reassigned to a non-operational post, sent an email apology that took 3 paragraphs to say what 3 words would have covered. But the hospital staff. They sent her off with Tears homemade cookies, a collage of photos from that night, and a note from the trauma unit that said, "Once family, always family." She kept that note. Every single day since. 6 months later, she stood in a converted firehouse in rural Ohio, the new headquarters for the statewide Emergency Access Initiative. The building wasn't glamorous. It smelled like old wood and new paint. The radiator clanged when it warmed up. Someone's dog roamed the hallway because nobody had the heart to tell the volunteer dispatcher no. But every time she walked through those doors, she felt grounded in a way she hadn't felt since she was a 19-year-old nurse trying to find her footing in a crowded ER. She spent her days traveling to small counties, meeting exhausted first responders, teaching triage basics to volunteers, helping communities build emergency plans that didn't rely on luck or weather. She oversaw training drills, equipment upgrades, and partnerships with hospitals across the state. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't national news work. But it mattered. Deeply. Sometimes on the drive home, she caught herself smiling for no reason at all. Warm, unguarded, honest. One afternoon in late spring, she stepped outside the firehouse just as a familiar yellow bus, repainted, repaired, and humming smoothly, pulled into the parking lot. Marcus climbed out first, grinning. The kids spilled out after him, running toward her with noisy excitement. "We came to help with the toy fundraiser," Kayla shouted. Hannah laughed, an easy open sound she once thought she'd lost forever. "Did you now?" Marcus approached, rubbing the back of his neck. "They've been begging for weeks. Figured it was good practice helping other kids." "And you?" she asked. He shrugged. "I guess I just wanted to see how you were doing." She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the kids chasing each other around the parking lot, the old firehouse with its sun-faded brick, the community volunteers unloading boxes of donated supplies. "I'm good," she finally said. Really good. Marcus smiled at her slow, warm, genuine. Yeah, he said. I can see that. They stayed outside for a moment, just watching the kids, the sun catching on the bus windows, the firehouse doors thrown open to let in the breeze. It wasn't a perfect life. It wasn't glamorous or polished or scripted for the press. But it was real. And it was hers. As the kids ran past them again, laughing, Hannah felt a lightness she once thought she'd never feel again. That small, steady certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And if you'd asked her what changed, she'd tell you the truth in one quiet line. Sometimes all it takes is one night, one storm, one brave step into the cold to finally come home to yourself.